All right, so in this mini lesson, we're going to be looking at the topic of cells. And so we're going to be going into specifically the parts of the cell, as you can see in the heading here of this text. And so to introduce cells, we're going to read this section in this biology textbook. It's CK12's online high school biology textbook, and it's a pretty good textbook, I think. So we're going to be looking through this, and I'm going to be modeling a during reading strategy that's annotating texts. And annotating text is something that is used to just help us sort of identify what we know and what we don't know. And through that, it just helps us comprehend texts. So I know that most students have looked at a textbook before, but has anybody ever taught you how to read a textbook? I'm guessing probably not. And so today we're going to really be sort of equipping ourselves in this strategy of how to read a textbook well. So I'm going to start annotating the text and model sort of how that looks. And then towards the end, we're going to transition and you will be able to do that yourself. So again, this is section 2.1, parts of the cell. And this first heading here says, what do a bacterial cell and one of your cells have in common? So first of all, what do I know about a cell? Well, I've heard that a cell is the basic building block of life. A cell is the basic building block of life. And then I know that bacteria are really small versus our cells are bigger. So what would they have in common if they're so different in size? Our cells are much bigger, right? And something that's cool about this textbook is as we're making these notes, we can look at them over here and click on this little note, and it pulls up the notes I've made so far. There are many different types of cells, but they all have certain parts in common. As this image of human blood shows up here, cells come in different shapes and sizes, and the shapes and sizes directly influence the function of the cell. Yet all cells, from the smallest bacteria to those in the largest whale, do some similar functions, so they have parts in common. Okay, so it addresses how size and shape influence the function of the cell. I wonder what different shapes of cells are there? All right, and then we're going to move to the common parts of cells, and the subheading says discovery of cells. The first time the word cell, was used to refer to these tiny units of life was in 1665 by a British scientist named Robert Hooke. 1665. That was a long time ago, like 355 years ago. And what was going on in the world at that time? Well, America was just being colonized, but we weren't our own independent country yet as the United States. So that's just something that I'm connecting to the text here. Hooke was one of the earliest scientists to study living things under a microscope. And I know I've used a microscope before. Microscopes help me see tiny things. The microscopes of his day, though, were not very strong, but Hooke was still able to make an important discovery. When he looked at a thin slice of cork under his microscope, he was surprised to see what looked like a honeycomb. Hooke made the drawing in the figure below to show what he saw. As you can see, the cork was made up of tiny units, which Hooke called cells. And the caption for this picture here says cork cells. This is what Robert Hooke saw when he looked at a thin slice of cork under his microscope. What type of material is cork? Do you know where cork comes from? And maybe you don't know this, or maybe you do, but I happen to know that cork is a material that comes from tree bark. Tree bark. And so it's a type of plant tissue. Soon after Robert Hooke discovered cells in cork, Anton van Leeuwenhoek in Holland made other important discoveries using a microscope. Leeuwenhoek made his own microscopic lenses, and he was so good at it that his microscope was more powerful than other microscopes of his day. In fact, Leeuwenhoek's microscope was almost as strong as modern light microscopes. So this is kind of amazing that Leeuwenhoek's microscope, which was way back hundreds of years ago, was as strong as microscopes are today almost. Hundreds of years old. So this is a wow moment, kind of impressive. Using his microscope, Leeuwenhoek discovered tiny animals such as rotifers. Now, I'm not sure what rotifers are, so can I understand what the text is saying here? Well, I can kind of figure it out because it says that they're tiny animals, and so that's showing that his microscope is working well if it's able to identify small animals such as rotifers. So maybe I don't understand exactly what rotifers are, but I can sort of infer what the significance of this is. It goes on to say Leeuwenhoek also discovered human blood cells. He even scraped plaque from his own teeth and observed it under the microscope. And I'm going to react to the text here. Gross. That's pretty weird. What do you think Leeuwenhoek saw in the plaque? He saw tiny living things with a single cell that he named animalcules, which in quotes says tiny animals, and today we call Leeuwenhoek's animalcules bacteria. So through all this learning about cells and looking at cells through a microscope, bacteria was discovered. So this is an important discovery. Okay, so we're going to sort of transition and just reflect on the notes that I've taken so far. And okay, so it looks like here I've got just a engaging prior knowledge, and sometimes that's what we do when we annotate is we just think about what our prior knowledge is, and so I knew that cells are basic building blocks of life. And here it looks like I asked a question about how bacterial cells and my cells are different. So when we take notes and annotate texts, sometimes we ask questions. Going down here, oh, whoops, I ask another question here. Moving down, I take a note on sort of the historical context, and this is again making connections across different subjects. Here I am looking at sort of the prior things that I've learned about what a microscope is. And again, I'm engaging with prior knowledge here that I know what cork is. Here I have a wow moment where I'm reacting to the text about how Leeuwenhoek's microscope was so strong. Here I ask another question about something that maybe confuses me. I almost got lost there, but was able to figure out based on context what was happening. Here's a reaction where I just say gross, and that's me reacting to the text, and it doesn't maybe contribute a ton to my knowledge of this text, but sometimes we just react to text when we're reading, and this is just a normal part of engaging in a text. And then similarly here, my reaction to the important discovery that through the microscope and through identifying cells, we were able to also identify bacteria. So here's the notes I've made to this point. And again, you can see that they engage in prior knowledge, they ask questions, make connections, and just react to the text. And these are my notes. And now moving into this next part, you're going to read about the cell theory, about cell diversity, and about the 4 common parts of a cell. And you're going to take your own notes and make your own annotations that respond to this text. And if you want to, there's also a summary section and review questions that you can sort of look at to identify if you're understanding this text. All right, so thank you and have a good day.